Chapter 13. Sam punched the TARDIS door control furiously, but nothing happened. She hadn't expected it to. After a moment, she heard Kittig's heavy footsteps approaching. "This is a time machine, isn't it?" asked the Tractite. Sam nodded miserably. "And the Doctor is going to change the history of our world so that the Tractites don't exist, just as you hypothesized on the skimmer." Sam nodded again. She felt like crying. She felt a 3-fingered hand touch her arm gently. "You are not responsible," said Kittig. "The Doctor is. And I am." Sam turned round, found herself looking right into Kittig's eyes. The Tractite had knelt down so as to be level with her. "You're responsible?" She listened as Kittig explained the role of the Keeper in the Tractite world, to watch for the coming of someone who might never come, who might be no more than a legend, but who might destroy everything. "And there's one in every city on Earth?" she asked when he had finished. "Every city in the galaxy," said Kittig quietly. "But you must understand, our role has changed over the centuries. The main threat is that innocent travellers who merely happened to resemble the description in the book would be destroyed by other Tractites, in case they were the Uncreator. I was given the job of Keeper by my father because I showed qualities such as calm judgment, rationality under pressure, and mercy towards others. He, and I, never really believed that there was an Uncreator." "And now?" Kittig let go of her arm, sat down on the floor, folding his legs beneath him. "It seems that we were wrong," he said after a while. Sam took a breath. "Look, Kittig, you've got to fight. You've got to do something. You can't just give in like this." "I'm not giving in," said Kittig. "But there's nothing I can do, is there?" Sam thought about it. There had to be a way. She couldn't let Kittig out of the TARDIS, but she was pretty sure there would be a way that she could get out. She knew the Doctor. He always left a back door open. She looked towards the carved entrance to the cloister room. "I might be able to help you," she said slowly. "I could go after the Doctor. I could at least talk to him, try to find some other way." "I can't ask for your help, Sam. Your loyalty must lie with your own people." Sam swallowed. "I think your people are better. I saw what our people did to them when, in the other universe or wherever it was. I know. That story may or may not be true. Your people may or may not be worse than mine, if you can make such comparisons about an entire species. But if you helped to destroy humanity or prevent their creation, you would be betraying all your life up to the present time. Your parents, your siblings and friends, your children." Sam had to laugh. "I haven't got any children. I'm only 17. Kittig snorted softly. "That may explain it then. Imagine then how your parents would feel if they were in your position and were asked to betray you to save another species." Sam thought about it. Her mother, her father. Would they think the Tractites were better than humans? Yes, almost certainly. Would they abandon her in order to save the Tractites? Well, they'd abandoned her to save the whale. They'd gone on marches, weekend protests, left her with Gran or with friends, or made her march with them, back when she hadn't wanted to, hadn't really understood what it was all about. But would they leave her to die? She thought of her mother's earnest face, her father's grey beard and old blue roll-neck sweater. No, they'd marched as an investment in the future. Her future, for her, and they were trying to save, not destroy things. Nonetheless, they would be on the Doctor's side if they were here instead of her, and they would be doing it because of her. Sam shook her head, reminded herself to make sure that the Doctor dropped her off soon at some point in time, not too long after she had vanished, so that she could tell them she was okay and not to worry. or at least send them a postcard. Except that, unless the doctor succeeded, they'd already ceased to exist. "Oh," she said aloud, and sat down rather suddenly. Kittig looked at her. "My parents don't exist anymore, unless I—" She broke off. "You see," said Kittig gently, "it's not so easy making choices." Sam stared up for a long time at the brass infinity of the console room sky. Finally, she stood up. "Kittig," she said, "if I go after the doctor, will you promise me something? Will you promise me that you won't try to come after me, that you'll stay here?" Kittig looked at the ground for a moment, then met her eyes. "I promise." Sam was certain, absolutely certain, that she could trust him. It was the only thing she was certain about at the moment. She walked around the console towards the huge dark door that led to the cloister room. "So, you're saying this is 2 million years ago?" Julie was shivering despite the heat. She was very obviously feverish, her skin pale, sweat dripping off her face. She had given the gun to Joe while she worked on tying Heinz's hands together with shredded pieces of his shirt. Joe shrugged. "Time travel isn't all that rare. The doctor's lot try to keep it to themselves, but you can't really stop a technology from spreading. I've never seen a tree do it, but I dare say the doctor could explain it." "Who's the doctor?" asked Heinz suddenly. His voice was thick with spit and fear, but Joe had no sympathy for him. Julie was ill. Rowena was ill. Probably they were dying. If Captain Heinz was telling the truth about infecting them with a virus, he was a murderer. "But how are we going to get back?" Joe knew that Julie was still thinking about a hospital, about treatment for whatever nightmare disease Heinz's alien friends had given her. But Joe had seen too often what happened to people infected by alien viruses. She didn't have much confidence in the ability of 20th century hospitals to save Julie's life. "If only the doctor would turn up," she muttered aloud. "But then, timely rescues never were his strongest point." Julie's eyes fixed on hers. "Do you reckon he might turn up then, this friend of yours? Could he have an antidote for this thing?" Her voice was cracked, desperate. "I've no real reason to believe he's anywhere near this place," said Joe carefully. "But," she shrugged again, "call it a hunch." Julie sat back suddenly, swaying on her knees. Joe stepped forward and saw Heinz move at the same time. "You keep still," she cautioned him. "Julie?" Julie had put both hands on the ground to steady herself. She looked at Joe with terrified eyes. "You'd better give Rowena the gun," she whispered. "I'm losing it." Joe nodded. She checked the knots holding Heinz and decided that he was reasonably secure. Joe closed her eyes for a moment, suddenly aware that she was very thirsty. Very, very thirsty. Had she been infected too? She walked slowly over to the thorn tree where Rowena was sitting. "I guess I'm pretty nearly useless here," said her friend as Joe approached. Her voice was distinctly strained. Joe supposed that she was in more pain than she was owning up to. Joe squatted down next to her under the tree and put an arm round her shoulders. "I feel pretty useless myself," she confessed. "We'll just have to do what we can. Hope that the doctor can find us, or that we can somehow make the time tree go back." Rowena's shoulders hunched under Joe's arm, hard bone and muscles shivering with tension. "I don't think we should rely on either of those things. I mean, if the time tree dumped us here, it could dump us anywhere next time. We don't even know how to work it. And as for your friend, you haven't actually seen him for 20 years, have you?" Joe shook her head. "I just don't know what else we can do," she admitted. "Find our ancestors?" said Rowena quietly after a moment. Joe frowned. "I thought we'd found them." Rowena shook her head. No, not the Australos. Homo habilis. Our ancestors in the direct line. They'll be a lot smarter. They'll have access to water. Maybe they'll look after us if we get sick. I don't know. We'll survive longer if we can get them to help us. Joe stared at her. It's not impossible, said Rowena. Anthropologists have often made good relationships with ape communities. These people are a lot closer to us than apes. Joe looked down at her friend, listened to her shallow, unhealthy breathing. She had seen too many deaths, knew too well just how easily a living, thinking being could be turned into a body, a nothing, an empty bag of chemicals. We've got to do something. Joe felt the blood flow to her face. That had been her line once, many years ago. Rowena's right, Joe. Julie, standing over them, still visibly shivering in the tropical heat. Joe came to a decision. Okay, have you any idea where I might find these habilis things? Habilines? Try by the mountain. They might use caves for shelter, especially in the heat of the day. And there might be a spring, a pool, something. With a shock, Joe realised that Rowena too was visibly shivering. Joe took a step forward, looked around at the heat-rippled plain, at the rough, dark rocks around the base of the mountain. Anything could be hiding there. Leopards, lions, or perhaps unknown aliens here to make sure that Heinz's mission was a success. This was dangerous. She might not get back. But on the other hand, if she didn't do it, she wasn't going to live until morning, and neither were the others. She made herself remember the jungles of Spiridon, the Daleks cruising through the mist. Autons, faceless faces turning the corner, sea devils, Zaraks, deadly parasitic axons. If she could cope with that, she could cope with a leopard or two. She noticed that there was a backpack on the ground. I don't suppose you've got anything as old-fashioned as a mirror in there? You mean you want to look your best to meet your great-great-great-great-grandpa? Said Rowena. Joe had to smile. No, signalling. Anything that will reflect sunlight will do. Julie unlaced the bag, scrabbled around inside it. Will this do? She asked weakly, holding out an electronic personal organizer. The screen's reflective. Joe tried it out. The screen caught the sunlight well enough. Angling the machine carefully, she could see the pale reflection from it on Rowena's face in the shade of the thorn tree stump. The woman squinted, looked around, then realised what was happening and waved at Joe. 1 flash, everything's okay, said Joe. 2, I found water, or habilines, or something useful anyway. 3, I'm coming back, okay? How many for, I'm being eaten by a lion? Asked Rowena, deadpan. Joe didn't reply, just started walking. The floor of the corridor sloped downward so steeply that Sam needed to keep a hand on the wall to maintain her balance. It was made from stone, great grey flags glittering with tiny crystals. There was a constant breeze blowing up the slope. It seemed to promise a door, and outside, a vast fresh field full of poppies and daisies. But Sam knew it wasn't true. This was the TARDIS. There was no outside, just the wind coming from nowhere and going nowhere. She looked over her shoulder to check that Kittig wasn't following her. She'd asked him not to. He'd promised that he wouldn't. And she was sure he'd keep his promise. But she still felt guilty. The doctor had told her to stay put. He'd told her that the existence of the universe was at stake. I'm only 17, thought Sam angrily. How does the doctor expect me to cope with making decisions about the fate of entire universes? The answer was, of course, that he didn't. He hadn't. He'd told her not to. And she was still doing it, because she was certain that he was wrong. Had she stopped trusting the doctor? It seemed like it. I just have to give Kittig's people a chance, she told herself. I took him on board. I couldn't just let him sit there, paralysed, and watch while the doctor destroys everything in his life. The passageway began to level out, and the breeze declined. The stone walls began to change, becoming whiter, smoother, the material changing without a clear break from stone to a substance that resembled plastic. Round depressions appeared in them. She remembered that the doctor had called them roundels. Ahead, there was a bright, even light. She walked on, saw the angular white shape of the secondary TARDIS console, a clean white floor, the smell of plastic. Sam walked to the console, looked around until she found a likely door control, a red lever, almost begging to be pulled. She pulled it. The roundelled doors opened. Africa was outside. In the main console room, Kittig watched the screen as Sam stepped through the doors. It hadn't been difficult to work out how to operate the alien machinery. The scanner control was a simple knob. Push in for outside view, pull out for inside view. No keypads here, no microcalipers. Kittig wondered how something so apparently simple could control the massive forces needed to travel through time. He watched as the doors closed behind Sam, then changed to an outside view. He hadn't followed her, he told himself. He'd just watched her go. And he wasn't going to follow her now. He was just going to use the same route. Even so, he knew he was breaking the spirit of his promise to her. But she had been right. He had a greater loyalty. Kittig thought about Naranil, about Kritil, Jontil and Mritig playing in the garden, about the vast, quiet city around them, about the vast, quiet, civilized world he had left behind. "I will save you," he murmured aloud. "I will save you all somehow. And then I will come home."